The Berlin Wall. It was one of the deadliest borders in the history of humankind. Today, it's a 100-mile or 160-kilometer mixed-use trail called the Berliner Mauerweg that wraps around the city. I regularly run, cycle, and walk around this trail without giving it a second thought. And it was during one of my regular runs along the Mauerweg that I thought to myself, what if I told my parents back in the late 80s that not only would I one day live near the Berlin Wall, but that I would love running alongside it? Well, first of all, they'd probably be like, what are you talking about? You're barely 3 years old. But I bet their second thought would have been, you're nuts. I've since crossed many borders in my life, from Puente Cixola in Costa Rica and Panama to most recently the Israeli wall separating Israel and the West Bank of Palestine. I can't help but wonder, what if these human-made borders could be dismantled like the Berlin Wall and also turned into a trail for everyone to enjoy? While I was wondering, I called up my old friend and Berlin on Bike tour guide Sascha Mullerin to tell the story of the Berlin Wall and how it became a trail. Sascha grew up in West Berlin and was 15 years old when the wall came down. And while he tells the story, I'm going to run, paddle, and cycle along the wall to see it from a different perspective and learn more about those who escaped or lost their lives trying to cross the Berlin Wall.
It's 1945. Germany is separated into 4 occupation zones by the Soviets, the Americans, the French and the British, and Berlin itself sits smack in the middle of the Soviet zone, itself once again divided into 4 zones. It becomes clear pretty much right away after World War II that the Soviets and the Western Allied would find themselves on opposing sides of world politics for the foreseeable future. In 1949, 2 German states are created. And then these 2 sides develop in wildly different ways. While the West started to receive tons of money from the US as part of the Marshall Plan to make sure we are not becoming communist, in the East, the Soviets start constructing industrial facilities, including train tracks, and transport everything eastwards. The West, people start buying TVs, going on holidays, having meat and chocolate and coffee almost every day. And in the East, things are going more or less downhill. So it starts what was later called a vote with their feet. Between 45 and 61, over 2.5 million people leave East Germany to find a better life in the West. So they start fortifying the border in the countryside from 1952, 1953 onwards, and Berlin was kind of a loophole. So people could just move from anywhere in East Germany to East Berlin and walk over the street because that border wasn't yet fortified. And then August 13, 1961, about 40,000 policemen, builders, and troops close off West Berlin from the rest of the world. And what's still really surprising to me is how few people knew that was going to happen. So all these 40,000 people were told they're going on a training exercise, and then they arrive at the night before. It's like 11:30, and they're told, well, it's actually no exercise, we're closing the border. And no one in Berlin didn't have anyone caught on the wrong side of the border. 120,000 people alone were living in East Berlin and working in the West. So imagine yourself had the night shift in a big cigarette factory in West Berlin, and Sunday morning you see all your colleagues in front of the gate talking, and they tell you, well, the border is closed. What do? Do you stay in the West and maybe never see your family or your friends again, or you move back and maybe lose your last chance to go to the West?
Well, today we are going out on a run along the Berliner Wall Trail. It's a beautiful Sunday morning, September. My watch is beeping because it's been taking too long to get ready. But yeah, it's a beautiful day. We're going to go along my usual route whenever I run along the Berlin Wall Trail. And although it is beautiful out, it's going to be some, as far as I can tell from the research, I've done some very depressing history along this part of the wall where people tried to escape and unfortunately didn't make it. Some did make it through some of these parts. But yeah, I'll tell you more of those stories while we go for this run. stories in even this relatively short stretch of the 100-mile border wall turned trail are heart-wrenching.
So it was around here where a lot of the escape attempts started happening.
One of those was 37-year-old Hildegard Trabant, who was shot in the back on August 18, 1964, while trying to escape, even though she had already given up once the guards noticed her.
Now getting ready to run underneath Bornholmer S-Bahn station, where at least 3 people lost their lives. One of them was actually a transit police officer.
Bornholmer was one of the 16 GO stations where trains drove through between east and west without stopping. They went through the death strip, so it was closely monitored. The transport policeman was Hans Dieter Wese, who was killed during an escape attempt on August 23, 1962. Dietmar Schultz was also murdered here in 1963, and Thomas Taubman died jumping from a moving train in 1981.
Now we're running by the Pankow Cemetery and some other train stations where other crossings took place and attempted crossings. And in one case, like wildly tragically, guy got his hand on the other side of the wall, was about to pull himself over when he got shot. But now you never know, it's just a nice trail on a sunny day.
That young man was Michael Schmidt. On December 1st, 1984, less than 5 years before the wall would come down, the 20-year-old climbed over the first border barrier with a ladder around here at Schulzerstrasse. He set off an alarm and was spotted by a guard tower about 100 meters away. The guard started firing at him as he reached the last barrier. He leaned his ladder up against it, climbed, and was shot in the back and the knee with one arm on top of the wall. The stories rarely get any better. On Christmas Day 1983, 20-year-old Silvio Proch was shot dead at the Pankow Cemetery. His brother said that Silvio simply wanted freedom. Then there's Van Hod Mispelhoorn, an 18-year-old who was shot and killed trying to cross the wall. He had hoped to make it to the west to be with his girlfriend, who had recently managed to reunite with her family. A number of people did successfully escape around here near the Wilhelmsruhe S-Bahn station, so 19-year-old Horst Frank went for it with his friend Detlef. They'd been crawling through the border strip for 4 hours, moving slowly to avoid detection. Detlef got out, but Horst was spotted just before reaching the other side and was killed while tangled in the barbed wire. The last point of a failed escape attempt we pass on our run is around here, where 20-year-old Dorit Schmiel tried to escape at the same spot where one of her cousins successfully fled. 2 friends joined Dorit, cutting through the barbed wire fence and crawling through the snow. Guards fired and struck Dorit in the stomach. She later died at the hospital. 30 years later, Dorit's friends were able to participate in the trial against the 3 border guards who were responsible for her death. Heading further north, the trail wraps into some forest and is often surrounded on all sides by tall trees and lush greenery. Only by knowing the history can you get a sense that you're running in the middle of no man's land. Otherwise, you'd be forgiven for thinking you've just stumbled across a lovely pedestrian and cycling trail that offers Berliners a bit of fresh air.
In the end, the decision to close that border was made because they were losing all of their brightest and most productive people, right? The people who left first were the well-educated, the young, so everybody who had a reasonable good chance for a better life on the other side of the Berlin Wall. So they literally faced the decision, either we close down and give up on this idea of socialism in Germany, or we have to keep people in and just lock them in. And many people agreed with that decision in the beginning, right? The first couple of days, people weren't deterred by the barbed wire and the guards, because when no one shoots, what good is a guard for? You just jumped and run, and if you were quicker than them, you got off scot-free. So they knew to stop that, they had to start shooting. And of course, they didn't issue a press release or anything and tell them about it. So the first thing that the people of Berlin hear about the fact that at the border shooting is now a thing was when the first guy was shot. And we're here at the memorial for Günther Litfin, who was a young guy who already had an apartment in the West and wanted to move locations right on August 13th when they closed the border in front of him. About 2 weeks later, he finds himself here at the edge of a canal, and suddenly he gets yelled at. "Hey, stop, what are you doing here, border guards?" And he panics and jumps into the water, which was still part of the East. So they start talking to him, "Hey, look, we have new orders, you gotta come back." But on the next bridge over, there was a guard, a soldier, policeman from a different unit, and he didn't hesitate. He just started shooting. So of course the Berlin Wall didn't start as we think of it today, with like 2 walls, a fence, lots of watchtowers in between. This is the version of the border from the early 1970s. So over the years, the border became more and more militarized, more and more violent. For me, probably one of the most horrific stories is one where a mother and her toddler were supposed to be smuggled to the West in a secret compartment in a car. And just when they were at the border, the baby started to fuss. So the mother covered her kid's mouth. But the problem was that the kid had a cold. So they made it over to the West. They weren't caught. But when they opened the compartment, the kid was dead. So in the end, the mother killed her own child for fear of being caught. And that tells you all you have to know about that system. That doesn't mean you couldn't have had a good life in the East if you kept your mouth shut, you didn't care about any of that. So you could have had a good life in the East, especially like women's rights. They were miles ahead of the West in that regard. But for many people, once they found themselves in opposition for various reasons, it's like an itch you can't stop scratching. In total, nearly 150 people lost their lives just in Berlin. For the whole country, numbers are well above over 1,100. Just a few thousand people managed to get away in all these years.
When you think of the Berlin Wall, you likely don't think of water. But the border didn't just end at the shore, which is why Melanie and I came out to Wannsee to pedal along some of the invisible fence on a fittingly gray October afternoon. Dankeschön. Woo. And we're off. This bit of West Berlin is teeming with terrible history. Like this villa that housed the infamous Wannsee conference where Nazi leaders met to discuss the implementation of the final solution that led to the Holocaust. If you must walk by it, I recommend flipping it off. It's nothing if not cathartic. So we're out here on Wannsee. I think we're gonna do a little paddle around Duple Forst. This isn't actually the Mauerweg per se, but you are going over what they call the invisible border. And we're gonna go paddle around here along the invisible fence of the Berlin Wall, go under the Glienicke Brücke, the Bridge of Spies. Yeah, they said about 4 hours, so we'll see how we do. This is Große Wannsee, with the former West Berlin on both sides of the shore. But the lake narrows further west along Duple Forest, where the former East German border runs along the shore. It was across these narrow waterways where most tried to escape by water, like Hubert Holbein, who practiced diving and swimming in freezing water to prepare for his escape attempt across Jungfernsee. After 2 of his friends succeeded, Hubert made it across himself on November 21st, 1963. He went on to join a group helping refugees cross the border. In October 1964, he helped 57 East German citizens escape through a tunnel, including his own mother, setting an impossibly high bar for Mother's Day presents. It's nice, but it's not a tunnel to freedom like that nice Hubert boy got his mother.
So that behind me is the Glienicke Brücke, or the Bridge of Spies, where Tom Hanks famously exchanged spies. Or that might have just been a movie, but it was based on a real thing. This separated Berlin from Potsdam. Potsdam was in the former GDR. And today, paddling underneath it, you can see people are driving across it, no problem obviously, cycling, walking, and making the most of occasionally sunny, but mostly gray October afternoon here in Berlin. And we've got like a parade of boats going by right now, making their way over to a larger section of Wannsee. Right now, we're going to continue going around Duple Forst and get into some like more narrow canals where people actually did make successful escape attempts during the Berlin Wall period. And of course, unfortunately, some people lost their life trying to escape using some of the waterways. Okay, right now we're still making progress around Duble Forst, and right over there, that's where you can get Telltale Canal. And it was just not too far from here, down there, where Hermann Duble was going down with a motorboat with his partner and went over one of these invisible fences, one of these invisible parts of the Berlin Wall. Thought nothing of it. He actually saw somebody in the guard tower, gave him a wave, being polite, and the guards shot him. And that, of course, was one of the risks of crossing around here, because there are a lot of these invisible sections of the wall in the water, and you didn't necessarily know when you were crossing the border.
Broad picture, if we're talking about the end of the Berlin Wall, was all made possible by the rise to power of Mikhail Gorbachev, head of state and head of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, who basically said to the rest of the Warsaw Pact states, you do your own thing now. We won't tell you what to do, but on the other hand, we won't help you fight your own people if you get in trouble. So the first to test that out were the people in Poland. Then in May 1989, Hungary opened its border to Austria, and once again, thousands of people from East Germany took a detour from East Germany to Hungary, to Austria, to Western Germany. And what was new at the time was thousands and then later hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating week after week, saying, why should we leave? Right? This is our home. We want our home to change, and I don't want to change places. So it comes to a kind of funny and very consequential press conference on November 9th, 1989, when a guy named Günter Schabowski is at a press conference talking a lot without saying much, and journalists kept pushing him. So what are you going to do? Like 500,000 demonstrators there, 100,000 people got away last month. So what are you going to do? And then he pulled out a piece of paper that he didn't really know what was on there. And I paraphrase here, starts reading, in the future, citizens of the German Republic will have the right to apply for travel visa without special requisites. And then it gets quiet for about a second or so, and a journalist from Frankfurt asked the all-important question, so when does that happen? And now is where it gets funny, because no one told him, it's not on his piece of paper. He looks at one of his cronies and they literally shrug their shoulders, and he says the first thing that comes into his head. As far as I'm concerned, right away, instantly.
Das tritt nach meiner Kenntnis ist das sofort. Unverzüglich.
So 10 minutes later, they headline, the border is open. But they were still thinking about paperwork and applying for something. And thousands of people moved to the next border stations. I was sitting at home on the couch with my mom, was 15 at the time, and we were watching both the press conference and the subsequent news item. And at one point she looks at me and said, what are you still doing here? And she gives me a 20 and say, like, go take a look. You're going to regret it for the rest of your life if you're not going to witness this. So I called my best friend at the time, and we took a bus from the leafy suburbs of Lichterfelde and drove to Brandenburg Gate, which wasn't a border checkpoint, but the border at Brandenburg Gate wasn't just like a simple wall. It was like a 2.5 meter wide bulwark. And when we arrived, there were already a couple thousand people singing Beatles songs and dancing on top of the Berlin Wall. And I very vividly remember people jumping down to the east And when the border guards started rushing towards us, we pulled them back up. And after a while, they got so unnerved by that they posted a cordon of soldiers like 5-6 meters in front of the Berlin Wall. And I remember how these guys looked. None of them wanted to be there, right? They all knew this is for nothing. And then the next day, they started taking pieces out of it, like without really organizing it, without anybody making a big decision. It just happened, like an absolute whirlwind, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
I met Sasha 10 years ago while I was working on a story about the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was my first time in Berlin. We met in Prenzlauer Berg, part of the former East Berlin, and cycled 35 miles or about 56 kilometers south along the Mauerweg. Little did I know I'd live in that very same neighborhood just a few years later. I decided to take a ride down memory lane, cutting through the city to pick up the trail where I left it 10 years earlier.
After pedaling through basically the heart of the city, through Neukölln, I finally reached the Mauerweg. It took me about 15 kilometers to get here. I know I rode this stretch 10 years ago when I was here to write about the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. But I guess I just don't remember like how country it gets out here. I've pedaled by loads of horse turds. You smell like you're in farm country. It's wild. And you know, not that long ago in my lifetime, this was one of the most dangerous spots in the world to be. It's thought-provoking is what it is, people. Here you can kind of get a sense of no man's land being to the right of me. Not at all creepy. To just be pedaling by the scars of one of the most dangerous border crossings in mankind. Cool.
It's not just that this used to be where the Berlin Wall tore through the countryside, it's how objectively beautiful it is today. People died here, and now this is what it looks like? It gives my cynical old heart hope for the countless borders that exist today. May they all be torn down and turned into bike paths like these. Further up the way, I came across a pleasant surprise.
Johnny Whitlam, what are you doing here?
You told me to be here.
Right, that makes sense.
Johnny is a local tour guide and a walking encyclopedia of Berlin history. You might remember him from my run around the Berlin Ringbahn. He's met me out here on the Mauerweg to tell perhaps one of the most poignant stories attached to the Berlin Wall.
So sadly, we've come to one of the most tragic spots on the Berlin Wall Trail. And it's right here next to me, where the last person was shot for trying to escape to West Berlin. Now, he wouldn't be the last person to die. There's another man named Winfried Freudenberg who died 1 month later in an accident. But Chris Gueffory is the last person to be actively killed by East Germany's shoot-to-kill orders. But did those orders exist? There is obviously evidence in terms of the people that were shot, in terms of the bodies, but there is no one document that says we're going to shoot people at the Berlin Wall. It's really rather tragic. At the beginning of 1989, there were rumors floating around that East Germany was going to rescind this order. And of course, who's likely to believe that? 2 young lads who think life for me in the West is going to be better. If I can just cross this canal and get to West Berlin, everything's going to be cooler. You know, faster cars, cheaper beers, whatever it is. And so they wait. They wait until a Swedish politician is visiting East Berlin and they think, there's no way they'll do it then. They don't want to embarrass our country on the international stage. So the 2 lads, they jump here into what is now a bike path, but used to be the death strip. Berlin Wall, kind of either side, full control by East Germany, guard towers, guns, all the rest of it, lights. His friend gets over, but Chris Gueffory is shot from both sides by several border guards. And one of the bullets hits him in the heart, and he dies. On what would have been his 35th birthday in 2003, a memorial here is erected. And today, this always hits me, he would only be in his mid-50s, not yet even 60 years old.
Another often overlooked positive aspect of the fall of the wall was that it created a lot of space inside the city. Some of you might know places like Mauerpark or the park at Nordbahnhof, which had been turned into green spaces, but there wasn't like an overall experiences pulling all these places together. And then in the 90s, a guy named Kramer had the idea to create a trail all around West Berlin.
In 1989, in summer, I cycled along the Berlin Wall on the West Berlin side. And that was the trail which was done by the Allies. And I never could imagine that some months later the wall would be open. And we had directly the idea that there should be a trail where the wall used to be. But at that time, the slogan of the politicians, of the newspapers and so on, no, disappear, 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 totally the wall. But that was not possible. But 10 years later, I was in the city-state parliament of Berlin. I got an unanimously majority for the Berlin Wall Trail, and it was signposted and built in a bicycle-friendly manner.
Even if you don't know anything about the Berlin Wall, if you just start cycling along it and stop whenever you see like a poster or something, you can learn so much about it. And now, especially over the last, say, 8 to 10 years, infrastructure along the way gotten a lot better, so it's almost like properly paved everywhere. So it's a great way to experience both history, politics, and nature in and around Berlin. I mean, to be honest, at the time I didn't really think anything about it. For me, and this is like now looking back, this is probably the weirdest thing about it all, is how normal this all felt. This was just how things were, right? You walked past there, and even in February '89, I think Erich Honecker said something like, yeah, the wall will still be here in 100 years. And we all went, yeah, sure, right? We never really questioned it, right? These days, I love this wall trail. I love the fact that this is a tangible way to experience history and like spend time outside in beautiful Berlin.